We've discussed some amazing things that can be done with big data, especially when an individual's information is compared to a massive data set. Some of those examples, however, can feel like they've crossed the line that separates the impressive from the creepy. That's because privacy is an important issue, and a lot of these examples feel like they may have crossed the line into private information that people did not expect to have divulged. People don't want their personal information to be public. Indeed, over the last several years there have been severe consequences to breaches of privacy, either accidental or intentional. On the other hand, people do want to have quality service and need to have good research. One possible solution is to anonymize data to make it anonymous. By removing identifiers like names, addresses, and other obvious personally identifiable information. But many such attempts have failed dramatically. One of the major challenges of working with big data is that even when a person attempts to make the data anonymous by removing obvious identifiers, it's actually not impossible to de-anonymize the data. A really telling example of this came a few years ago during the Netflix Prize, when Netflix provided people with an anonymized dataset of user ratings on movies. Two researchers, Ervin Narayanan and Vitaly Shmatakov, were then able to take that information and compare it with identified user ratings on the Internet Movie Database, IMDb. They were then able to match people who are identified by name on IMDb with anonymized ratings on Netflix and connected two datasets. A bigger challenge, there was another contest that looked at social networks. The contest included information that said, this person who was identified just by a random number is connected to certain individuals. From that, you get a social network graph. That's a picture that we've shown before where each circle here represents an individual, and the lines are nodes that connect them with other individuals. What the researcher was able to do in this case was again, send out a computer crawler go through several social network sites that were publicly available, and they were able to find simply by matching shapes. They had no other information aside from the shape with a diagram. They were able to identify a social network which actually came from Flickr, the photo sharing site. They were able to identify shapes in the Flickr social network that matched the data in the contest data, and they were able to then sort of de-anonymize the dataset as well, simply by matching by geometry. Even more dramatic example. A researcher, Latanya Sweeney, showed that she was able to purchase voter records for Cambridge, Massachusetts. What this included on the left is the name and address, date registered, party affiliation, and date last voted, along with the zip code, birth date, and sex for each person in that voter list. On its own, that's not much information, except you do find out the party affiliation when they voted. But what she also found is that, with just 3 of those pieces of information, the zip code, the birth date, and the person's sex, she was then able to go to medical records that were publicly available and match them up and find the person's ethnicity, their visit date, their diagnosis, their procedure, their medication, and their total charge. In fact, she was able to identify the governor of Massachusetts from that dataset and get his medical information. Indeed, she was able to correctly identify 97% of the individuals in the medical data. This was done about 20 years ago. Fortunately, the regulations had changed since then. Now we have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, better known as HIPAA, which has a lot to do with privacy regulations in medicine. HIPAA requires that a lot of different information, about 17 major variables, need to be anonymized or aggregated. For instance, you can't report a person's age, or you can't give their birth date. You can simply say how many years old they are. If they're over 89, you just have to say they're over 89. You can't give the zip code, you can only give the state. So, it becomes much larger groups and much harder to identify people. By doing so, Latanya Sweeney showed that there is only 0.04% of the people can be identified. For comparison purposes, the probability of getting struck by a lightning is about 1 out of 10,000, so it's in the same vicinity as that at risk. The point here is that, while re-identifying people in anonymized dataset can be done, it's very hard to do it. As Professor Sweeney has shown, if the information is properly anonymized, it's nearly impossible to identify people. The point of these examples is not to encourage paranoia, but rather to point out that care needs to be taken when we're working with big data, especially when personally identifiable information is present, in order to ensure privacy. Is a start, but it requires some thought and care to be done well, in order to provide services and conduct research without crossing the line into creepiness or into legal trouble.